It seems as if the coronavirus is finally starting to die down in many Western countries. It must have had a couple of sips of bud and finally realized its competition. On today's episode of Headlines, we'll be looking at the drop in Covid-19 cases, the current state of the airline industry, a scuffle in the WHO, the US-China security policy, a giddy Gideon, and finally the Bundesliga kickstart. Welcome to Headlines. The WHO came out a few days ago with a grave announcement. The world saw a peak in Covid-19 cases, to be precise, 109,000 in 24 hours. However, on the bright side, countries in the West have begun to ease their lockdown restrictions and social distancing policies for the Covid-19 saga. Countries are beginning to see a decline in the number of new coronavirus cases while accepting that the disease is something that needs to be lived with in the long term. Primary schools, nurseries, coffee shops, and even some barber shops have reopened in some countries across the West. Most people have been granted permission to go back to work, although social distancing policies still need to be followed. In France, President Emmanuel Macron announced a lifting of many lockdown restrictions. In the USA, many states, including California and New York, have begun to ease up their lockdown restrictions, even though declines are only being seen in pockets. However, Dr. Anthony Fauci, an expert on infectious diseases who was advising the White House, claimed that hastily ending lockdowns before the disease dies down or a vaccine is created would result in more suffering and death and do more economic harm in the long run. I think we should take him at his word. He really knows what suffering looks like after causing Mr. Trump so much pain when Brad Pitt was cast to play him on Saturday Night Live. All Trump got was a pouty Alec Baldwin. Next up, airlines, an industry that started to think of schemes that seem more like being on a wing and a prayer than enabling them to stay afloat in these trying times. Avianca, the flag carrier of Colombia and the world's second oldest continuously running airline after KLM, filed for bankruptcy a week ago, blaming that low travel rates caused an 80% drop in revenue. LATAM, the Chilean flag carrier, has laid off 1,400 workers in an attempt to keep with their budget amidst the coronavirus. Spirit, a budget American airline, recently witnessed an unprecedented stock drop. Although it has climbed again, the company is expecting another drop, which may lead to furloughing of staff in the near future. It looks like the airline is operating with a new slogan: Spirit, we lower it. Our next story is about the gossip girl-like high school tension drama that is China and Taiwan. Since 1945, the pair have had the nastiest of rivalries, with each claiming to represent the other, but with China eventually muscling its way to the front and cutting off Taiwan from formal relationships with international organizations and most countries. On Monday, however, the WHO convened a virtual meetup for an important reason: to decide whether Taiwan should be recognized in the WHO as an observer. China, obviously, was completely against this decision, but WHO countries were treating China like it was a product made in China. You know, you're happy with it for the first few days, but then when it starts to break down, you snap. And from the look of the meetup, it seemed like many countries have finally reached their breaking points. Germany, Canada, France, Japan, and Australia are just a few of the countries expressing their support for Taiwan. Taiwan, in the end, stated that they didn't want their presence at the WHO to prevent countries from mitigating the coronavirus crisis, but they were not impressed with Beijing's two-faced behavior. However, given that Taiwan obtained support from other countries and even dissed the mainland government, they're probably seeing this entire story as an absolute win. Next to the USA. The ban on domestic telecommunication companies using Chinese mobile equipment produced by major firms, including Huawei, has been extended. Apparently, this is because of security issues, since there are fears that the phone companies will release consumer data to China. But in all honesty, the most the Chinese government will find if that ever happens is probably just going to be directions to the nearest McDonald's and recipes for how to make fresh avocado toast. Some sources say, however, that the primary reason as to why the US is extending the ban is an attempt at decoupling from China. What exactly does this mean? Well, in recent months, the COVID-19 pandemic has displayed the USA's reliance on China for medication production, masks, and medical technology. And the fact that the USA is metaphorically taking the knee to China right after a prolonged trade war has pushed the country to figure out ways in which they can avoid further reliance on one of the biggest nations in the world. Now, let's turn to an incident that sounds like something straight out of a Tom Clancy video game. In Venezuela, 8 people were killed in an attempt to kidnap Nicolas Maduro, the country's dictator, and bring him to the USA. Maduro is infamous for human rights violations, economic destruction, and political corruption during his presidency, which began in 2013. In September last year, a team that worked under Juan Guaido, recognized by most Western nations as the interim president, visited Miami to discuss plans to remove Mr. Maduro by force. The team was met with an offer from Silvercorp, a large private military contractor who agreed to nab the Venezuelan dictator for a $200 million fee. And after nearly 8 months of planning, the task force from Silvercorp and a group of Venezuelan dissidents commenced Operation Gideon, the Maduro extraction mission, on the 3rd of May. But this attempt, as seen from last week's happenings, was botched. Silvercorp was sourcing its weapons with the help of Venezuelan General Cliver Alcala, but when the US indicted Alcala for drug trafficking, the general publicly leaked details of Operation Gideon and it was called off. A couple of valiant operatives attempted to carry on with the plan anyway, but Mr. Maduro, knowing all about the plot, made sure to post armed Venezuelan troops at the infiltration points, ensuring that all opposition was eliminated. So, Nicolas Maduro is in the clear for now. Might as well call him Nicolas Mojito because he'll be sipping a chilled drink to celebrate the event, much to the frustration of most Venezuelans. Finally, football. The German Football League, Bundesliga, kicked off its season on May 16th. They were the first football league to resume matches. The league started off with a not-so-intense match between Dortmund FC and Schalke, which ended with the former winning 4-0. The football matches will only see about 300 people entering stadiums as A, that's the maximum number of people permitted, and B, the league isn't receiving many purchases for tickets. Players and coaches have described the stadiums as eerily quiet, almost as if the matches were just training sessions and not competitive. But, as Freddie Mercury once said, the show must go on. And on that note, those are your headlines for the week. I'll see you next time on Headlines.